One reason I think we're seeing more trade conflict happen now is China's getting more economically powerful, more influential, and its statecraft is changing. And in some ways, it's challenging the norm, it's challenging the hegemon, the US, and it's getting into a conflict. With Australia, it's a little bit different. I think, again, it's becoming more powerful and assertive. And Australia's feeling the brunt of this for a number of reasons. I think the two most important reasons are declining political relations, probably starting with Australia banning Huawei from bidding on the 5G networks in Australia. And of course, about a year ago, Australia demanding an investigation into the origins of coronavirus, which of course China is not in favor of.
Of course. So it all starts somewhere, right? There's a political conflict between two powers. I mean, in this case, it started with US and China. But then, of course, Australia is this much smaller country. It doesn't play part in this whole, apart from being a big trading partner with China. It's drawn in because it's politically aligned with the US, perhaps? Is that what's happened?
Well, that's certainly one narrative. And in that line of narrative, that Australia is taking the brunt to make an example. So that others do not follow suit. I think Australia is seen quite closely aligned with the US, and perhaps that that call into the origins of coronavirus was the final straw.
So what we have now is a conflict, political conflict between China and Australia, but spilled into trade, right? As you said before, we've had blocks on coal, barley, wine, and then a lot of anti-dumping duties placed on these products. So currently, Australia's complained to the WTO. I mean, looking to the WTO, the international scene, to arbitrate on the block on barley, the anti-dumping duties on barley. Now, what does that mean at the world trade level when you have something like that?
Sure. So China has done an internal investigation over the past 18 months, and they've determined that Australian barley is being dumped onto their market. Essentially, that means sold at unfairly low prices. Australia does not believe that China followed the international rules in how it carried out that investigation, and is therefore challenging China's anti-dumping duties at the WTO. Now, this process is long. It normally takes around 2 years at the earliest to conclude. And during that time, of course, China will maintain its duties against Australian barley, which is around 60% or so, which effectively will shut Australian barley out of the market for the 2-year period.
Wow, it takes 2 years.
At least
2 years. How much longer can it get? I mean, you've seen on the world stage, how long can these cases take?
I mean, they can take longer.
5 years?
Not so much, but remember right now we don't have an effectively functioning appellate body. And so if either side would appeal the panel report, we say that's appealing to the void, and those are just sitting there. So now, in fact, we're unsure how long this case can take to resolve.
Okay, so having the WTO arbitrate a panel like this between two countries, will it calm things down? Having a third party in an argument, is that useful from your perspective?
Look, in most instances, the parties do abide by the WTO decision, and if the complainant wins and the country that has taken, in this case, the anti-dumping measure, they will repeal them, and life will go back to normal. And if it hasn't taken too long, then market share will be restored from the original exporter. That being said, when you're in the middle of a trade conflict, the system may not function as effectively. The system only works if the parties want it to work. And right now we have, at least probably 10 different products which are being kept out of China from Australia for various different reasons. I think, as you said, trade is now a part of a larger diplomatic dispute. And in this circumstance, I'm a little bit skeptical that China and Australia will de-escalate and cool down simply on the basis of one WTO panel decision.
So let's just say the WTO was super efficient and decided to come up with a solution. Now, do they have to abide by that solution and, just go with it? And then by doing so, calm things down, or would they use that? Would they use that as more arsenal for more fighting? Can anyone enforce the WTO solutions?
Sure. I mean, we do say that the WTO system is binding and enforceable, but no army is going to be sent in and force China to drop illegal anti-dumping duties. But the system does allow for Australia to take what we call retaliatory action up to the amount of harm that it is being caused by the dumping duties. And what that means is simply raising tariff rates on Chinese goods coming into Australia to that same dollar figure.
Right, gotcha.
And in essence, I mean, we have to remember the importer pays tariff rates.
Yes.
And so, effectively, it's going to be the Australian manufacturer or the Australian consumer that's paying those additional rates.
Right. So even if things don't work, if things do calm down, someone's going to have to pay for this.
Well, yeah, if China doesn't comply, if Australia wins the case and China doesn't comply. And this is why, I think it was said many times, with President Trump saying, China's going to pay these duties. And everyone said, no, China's not going to pay those duties. It's the American consumer and manufacturer. So this is really the same situation. If Australia wins a complaint and China doesn't comply, then Australia can simply raise the tariff rates on Chinese goods, but ultimately it's the Australians who are paying.
So you might have a political win per se with in this political war, but then in this there's collateral damage. The people, the consumers.
Sure.
They're going to suffer either way. They're already suffering right now, aren't they? I mean, with all the situation going on, the businesses are suffering.
Sure. Right now, it's the Australian exporter suffering, and if Australia would take retaliatory measures, it would be the manufacturer and the Australian consumers who would suffer. So it's not the first best option, right? The first best option is China complies, and that battle is over. But if China doesn't comply, then we're in the realm of second best and third best options.
Right, second best or third best. If all this, the whole thing calm down? In your view, in your mind, do you think this diplomatic spat will actually cease at some point, and if so, when?
I mean, I think trade is one part of the battle. It's an important part. It's a very visual part. We can see it. It's in the newspapers, but it is only a part. And I don't see any dispute settlement panel or even really diplomatic negotiations on trade resolving the larger, issues revolving around statecraft. I think, when you say how does this end, both parties have been escalating this dispute now for several months. And so I think that we're going to see further escalation before we see the situation calming down. Right. Eventually, I would guess that China would decide and determine that it has proven its point and will slowly back off some of the measures that it's taking, and hope that Australia would follow that cue.
And if that all calms down, there'll still be victims. There will be damage because commercially, these trade sectors would have moved on. Barley, producers and all that would have suffered quite a lot.
Of course, and I mean that is the situation that cannot be repaired. If Australian barley is shut out of China for 2 or 5 years, it's really going to struggle to recoup its market share. If Australian wine is kept out of China for probably even only 1 year, buyers will have moved on, wholesalers would have moved on, and I think it would be almost impossible to recoup the market share they had prior to this trade conflict.
That's very unfortunate, but thank you, Bryan. Thanks for your insights. We're very pleased to have you here today.
Great, thanks for having me.